Do you remember when you were really angry at one of the leaders who you had to work with? I'm sure we all remember these moments, and no matter if you are on the side of leadership or if you're not. Sometimes as a leader you did something and afterwards you realize that was wrong. I include myself here. I did many things wrong during my time in leadership. And I hope I could repair it afterwards by apologizing, by admitting my mistakes, and then by talking to people. However, when you're on the other side, on the receiving side of leadership, and something goes wrong and nothing really happens, then this takes a toll on you, and not only on you, but also on the company, the organization, the association, the group in which you are. And we're going to talk today about how to deal with errors, mistakes, misbehavior from leaders in your organization. And we had massive misbehavior in the recent past, and I'm talking about something which you might have heard about in international press. Patrick Moster, a German coach for bike racing, made a racist remark. He said to one of his athletes, it was live on camera, I saw it live on TV, and the coach tried to motivate his athlete. I have no idea why he said what he then said. He said, go get the camel drivers. Clearly 1940s German racism. He was referring to two athletes which were ahead of his German bike racer, and the two athletes he referred to were Eritrea's Emmanuel Gebrselassie and Algeria's Azzedine Legab. A massively racist utterance. What he did afterwards is he apologized, because what I really appreciated is that the reporter who reported the event, and German TV normally, especially when it's public TV, has to stay neutral. And the journalist sitting at the microphone didn't stay neutral at all, which was exactly the right thing to do, because he said completely unacceptable. Racism has no space in sports. Consequences have to follow. And the outcry followed immediately. However, it didn't go down too well. The BDR, which is the German Bike Racing Association, Bund Deutscher Radfahrer, led by Mr. Rudolf Scharping, a former Labour lead candidate who even tried to become Chancellor 20 years ago, but failed when he ran in the election. Rudolf Scharping said that the statement is not acceptable. However, and then he added, we will talk about that after the Olympics, and we will take into consideration the apology of Mr. Moster and also the amount of stress that the whole team was exposed to. So top tip here today, when you are the president of an official association, you just have a racism scandal, the right statement is not when in the first place you say, first, we're not acting right now, we act later, which is of course not acceptable because that coach would still be there for the rest of the Olympics. Second, you don't take sides, which Mr. Scharping here clearly did as the president of the German Bike Racing Association. And what he said is not only that they're going to take into consideration the apology, you don't have to say that because in a legal procedure that's common, but you're already taking sides when you say that. And also when you say, oh, such a tremendous amount of stress, you're already putting apologies on the table in favor of the racist offenders. Racism is a huge issue in German culture. In the English-speaking world, when you are in the UK or the US and you work for any company and you would call an intern who's working there for 1 week, and you would call that intern due to where they come from a camel driver, you will be fired either same day or next day, because there is a zero tolerance for racism. However, Germany, very different, and when it comes to equality, still very backward facing, at least 10 years behind international levels, which you so often have issues with non-well-trained and educated, diversity-oriented and diversity-educated people who come from Germany. Of course, there was a public outcry, and after that, the International Bike Racing Association of Europe said it's unacceptable what he said. The man has to be sent home. And under this international pressure, the German Bike Racing Association then sent him home a day and a half later. And of course, now you can say, oh, is that the right choice? Should we do it that way? I just tell you, McKinsey. You know McKinsey, premium consultancy company. They have a quite tough working culture because you have to get the days in and the bills sent out and you have to make your place worthwhile. However, even they, in their newsletter of last week, published an article, not referring to this bike racing incidents because that happened shortly after, but they said when it comes to a work environment, and I quote, we are only safe if everyone is safe. And when McKinsey says that, and sees that it takes a massive toll if you don't stick to your principles, then you see that you have to act as well as an organization. By the way, if you now think, I'm not really knowledgeable about that, who could I listen to? Just yesterday, we published an interview with Sean James, an LGBT activist, long-standing LGBT activist from the United States of America, who recently came out as non-binary. And on the German channel, in case you speak German, we interviewed Roman Jaburek, who talks about voice and also how to have a life which aligns with your voice, finding and living your voice. That, of course, that in case you speak German. But now, just think of, when you just think about, how was your first reaction when you were listening to me the last 60 seconds? If your reaction was, oh God, this non-binary gender thing again, really? If you had this reaction, you are already not only part of the problem, but you also run the risk that sooner or later, maybe even without a bad intention, you're going to perform a certain action or make a certain statement that harms your organization, your group, you personally, your career, and anything you have. So maybe it's time to listen to people, and listen to people instead of talking about them before you make a statement which is not based on evidence, proof, facts, and science, but maybe on a personal perception and opinion which doesn't align with the facts that are out there. Looking at the problem now, because as usual we are going to look at the problem and then how to do it better. The problem, of course, is when you have wrongdoing of a leader, it always comes to public quicker because leaders have a far bigger outreach, far larger outreach, and it has more present in the organization. And also sometimes people are just envious who want to have their career and put it to public because they want to talk about someone and their wrongdoing. That is one part of the problem. As a leader, when you do something wrong, people will realize it. The second aspect of why it is such an issue is just think of how often you were trained as an employee. Think of your time as an employee, and I assume that you don't start from university or vocational training straight into leadership, because that normally never happens except you have a personal contact, cronyism, nepotism, and by that not stick to meritocracy or any kind of delivery before you should do it, walk the talk, or been there, done that. So when you look at the amount of training you received on communication, on conflict management, on compliance, on regulatory, on diversity, on anti-racism training, anti-bias training, how to handle unconscious bias, how to handle sexism, how to handle racism, all of these trainings. And everyone told you, when you offend these rules, your time is over. And suddenly you see a senior leader, Patrick Moster is 55 years old, that's the person we're talking about, that's the German bike racing coach. A senior leader performs wrongdoing, and the first step is that the president of the association defends that person and then says, we're going to talk about that later, of course, trying to get away with it by doing so. And you really think, why do we have to face all these rules when clearly leaders can offend them at no consequences? And certain organizations do very well. Sports brands had to fire people due to racist comments. KPMG, we talked about that, fired their chairman, or well, the chairman stepped down, so probably they suggested him that either he says, my position became untenable, so I stepped down, which means he steps down before the person gets fired by himself from the board or the supervisory board. However, when so many people think there's obviously one rule for us and another one for them, you of course lose any kind of credibility as a leader. And then the reactions, and that's the third part of the issue, became too slow, too late, straightforward, dishonest, and everything you do becomes irrelevant because you already lost any bit of credibility. It feels like, when you do that, it feels like the only thing you're sorry about is that they called you out on it. You're not sorry about being racist, you're not sorry about wrong behavior, you're sorry about being caught and being called out for your wrongdoing. And also, when you perform wrongdoing and when you act in a certain way which is unacceptable, this comes with a massive price tag, with a massive toll on the mental health of every employee. Because people suddenly know they are not welcome here, they cannot bring their whole self to work, they cannot be who they are. And by the way, this whole statement, be who you are and get yourself to work as you are, that doesn't apply to 90% of the organizations. When you have a certain corporate dress code of suit and tie or wearing a shirt when people don't even wear shirts in normal life, and when they don't have client contact, there is no reason why they should wear these outfits. That already limits their full self, which you always claim to allow to work. Just think of what you're saying. When the mental health gets under tremendous pressure, people will stop to work for you, either because they become sick or because they simply say, I stop to work for you by my personal choice. And we have an amazing example of that during the Olympics. Simone Biles, the most decorated gymnast we have in the world, stopped to take part in the Olympics. She was facing many finals, was pretty much the person where everyone thought, okay, is it going to be gold or maybe gold? So even a silver medal would feel like a disappointment when you see the pressure put on these people. And by the way, if you ever look into the training program of gymnasts about their plans, what they are allowed to eat, when they have to go where, the kind of training they have to do, you basically give up your life for this sport. And normally when you stop doing that sport, you're not even healthy, because all your bones and everything you have are pretty much, with so many injuries, you basically have to get along in life with, let's say, challenging moments. And Simone Biles decided not to take part in the finals. And that was much applauded by the mental health community, but again, by the mental health supporting community. And of course, many organizations showed understanding, and many critics didn't talk about that they didn't like the decision because they know it's not, their position would become untenable when they do so, for a good reason, by the way. But still, we are talking so much about mental health, and now at the Olympics we see that still no one cared before. Wouldn't it have been better when 1 year ago you realized there's a mental health issue, you help someone with therapy, with proper coaching, with professional psychologists, therapists dealing with the issues the person has, you don't put it to public, everyone stays private, you solve the issue so you can perform at the Olympics. But once more, under pressure, no one cared. They only said, you deliver or you're out, and this is the consequence you get. And it's exactly the same in every organization that does not properly care about mental health. When you only care about deliver or you're out, there is no chance that people will constantly work for you. And of course, we now have to look into how to do it better. One part of that, of course, before we get into detail how to do it better, is you can offer training, different seminars, workshops in your organization. Coaching and consulting can help when you have events. It's highly recommended to have speakers addressing the issue so you get the impulse, the idea into your organization. And of course, with mentoring, project and interim management, there can be a lot that helps your organization. If you're interested in that, just send me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. nb@nb-networks.com. Always happy to help. And if you're interested in something in writing and articles, every week I have a content focused and completely ad-free email sent out. If you want to be part of that, just go to expert.nb-networks.com. expert.nb-networks.com. It's sent out every Wednesday. It's 100% content, and there's an ad-free guarantee. And also in the future, we will do live events completely free of charge, but only for people who read our newsletters frequently and are part of the discussion. So we keep it free of charge for people who are really interested in the event. So how to do it better now? How to do it better? So when you are a leader, you must be aware of the fact that people look at you, and they look at you for a certain reason. And the reason is that you have a position that you have to lead by example. People see you as an example and they will behave accordingly. So if you misbehave, other people will misbehave. So be aware that you have to lead by example. And if you are a person of public interest, something goes wrong, you have to make a statement. Maybe you heard that we had a tragic incident in Germany, Leverkusen, where one of the largest chemical companies in the country is having their headquarters. There was an explosion of tanks, and these tanks exploded, killed multiple people. There are still people missing, many people injured. And within minutes, the leader stepped up to press and gave their statement, because they have to. not only because news outlets wanted to have a statement. When you have to lead by example, when you are a person of public interest, you have to make a public statement. And by the way, that also means if you're not a person of public interest, no one can make you a person of public interest. So when you're not a commonly known person of public interest, you don't have to make any public statement, because in a lawful state, you have the right to say, I'm going to get a lawyer, get consultancy, and that person makes a statement on my behalf. So I can see what have I done wrong and how can I deal with it properly. No one can force you to make a statement. We are in a lawful state here. But when you are a person of public interest, as Patrick Moster clearly is, 54 years old, the bike racing coach with the racist utterances, of course, people wonder, when you call people camel drivers and practice this unacceptable racism, where does this come from? I think it's a certain mindset. It's a certain idea. This is not a word which you pull out of thin air. So does this person have a racist mindset? And of course, you have different options now. And the options are that you can either fire someone, which will probably most likely already have happened in the English-speaking world. You can fire someone, send warning letters, punish them, for example, by taking salaries away, or they have to pay a certain fine. It would be recommended, for example, to show a sign of goodwill that this person donates a couple of their monthly salaries, for example, for a charity which is engaged in anti-racism activities. And of course, when you, after a lawful procedure, come to the conclusion that there is no substance to the claim against that person, you can, of course, say the case is dismissed. But it is very important that you give reason. You have to avoid, and that is the third part of how to do it better, after you accept that you have to lead by example, no matter who you are, and second, you know your options you have. The third aspect is avoid any kind of pseudo activity. Because it always means when you come to a conclusion which is completely ridiculous, people will refer to that for years and years and years to come. So, for example, the most ridiculous action now from this bike racing association would be, or from any organization, association, whoever you are, if you, for example, have an offender on the board, then you come to a conclusion like, oh, we have to take more care in the future, which means we don't do anything. Then, of course, people might ask, who is going to take more care in the future? And you then choose someone who is a direct connection, a friend or something, from the person who is the legal offender. Then, of course, people see, oh, not only are there zero consequences, it also means people stay in charge, and people who are close to the offenders get an additional job, which is, of course, completely unacceptable. So be sure that you lead by example, know your options, from firing someone, sending warning letters, making them pay fines, recommending them to do donations, or if it's the worst case, forcing them to do so. By the way, when Patrick Moster would pay a certain fine, you would be shocked how low the income when you are a German bike racing coach and trainer is. And which is not a reason at all, of course, to be racist. But sometimes people might claim, oh, why is the donation of that coach so low? Well, because the payment is so low in these sports. And of course, you can dismiss it when you see there is no reason. And now there are legal procedures with the International Sports Court ongoing already. And I hope they come to a good conclusion. And we certainly will track down to which conclusion they came. It is now important that you put things into action. One step, for example, would be that you listen to the podcast yesterday, which we published with Sean James, the non-binary LGBT activist from the United States of America. So you start to see how people think, feel, and act about diversity, for example, that you can feel how other people who are not like you act, feel, and behave in a certain way. So you see their life reality. And of course, if you're able to speak German, feel free to listen to the interview of Roman Jaborek about voice and how to find your voice and live your voice as well. I'm very much looking forward to the discussions we're going to have this week. Just send me an email at nb@nb-networks.com, nb@nb-networks.com. Very happy to have these discussions. Every week is really nice to have these discussions on a very polite and respectful level, even when you have disagreement. It is simply very important that you now put things into practice, because if you only listen and don't walk the talk, you're going to make things worse. And also, your organization, your group, your company, whatever part you are, will be harmed by your activities. And if you do it even worse and suddenly the board accepts its behavior, every single member of the board becomes complicit and people will stop working for you. And that is for sure not what you want to have, because you for sure want to do it better. I wish you all the best putting the aspects I mentioned into practice in your organization. Happy to have a discussion with you. And for this week, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.